It's December 1943, somewhere over the Pacific. A lone American fighter pilot is surrounded by 20 Japanese Zeros. His plane is riddled with bullet holes. He's been shot down 3 times already in this war. By all logic, he shouldn't even be here. He's 31 years old, ancient by fighter pilot standards. He's a recovering alcoholic with a dishonorable discharge on his record. The Marines didn't want him. Nobody wanted him. But right now, in this moment, he's about to become one of the most decorated aces in American history. His name is Gregory Pappy Boyington, and his story isn't about being a hero. It's about redemption, rebellion, and leading the most unconventional squadron the military has ever seen. This is the true story of the man they called Pappy and the misfits who became legends. Let me take you back to where it all began, not with glory, but with failure. Gregory Boyington was born in 1912 in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. His childhood was complicated. For years, he believed his stepfather was his biological father. When he discovered the truth as a teenager, something broke inside him. That sense of not belonging, of being an outsider, it would define the rest of his life. But Boyington had one gift. He was brilliant. He attended the University of Washington, where he studied aeronautical engineering, not just studied it, excelled at it. He joined the ROTC, learned to fly, and by 1935 he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps Reserve. Everything was looking up. He got married, started a family, had a career ahead of him, and then he started drinking. Not socially, not casually, Boyington drank like he was trying to drown something deep inside himself. His marriage crumbled, his finances collapsed. By 1941, he was drowning in debt, facing potential court-martial for check fraud, and watching his military career circle the drain. He was 30 years old and completely washed up, but then Pearl Harbor happened. Now here's where the story takes its first unexpected turn. When America entered World War II, Boyington saw an opportunity not for patriotic glory, but for escape. There was a group forming in China called the American Volunteer Group, better known as the Flying Tigers. They were mercenaries, essentially, defending China against Japanese invasion before the U.S. officially entered the war. The pay was incredible, $600 a month plus $500 for every Japanese plane you shot down. For a man buried in debt and desperate for a fresh start, it was irresistible. There was just one problem. He was still a Marine. He'd have to resign his commission, so he did. Gregory Boyington walked away from the Marines, voluntarily gave up his career to become a mercenary in China, and for a while it worked. Boyington thrived with the Flying Tigers. He shot down 6 Japanese planes during his time there. He was good, maybe even great, but he couldn't escape himself. The drinking continued, the debts piled up. His relationships with fellow pilots deteriorated. By 1942, the Flying Tigers were being absorbed into the U.S. Army Air Forces, and Boyington found himself, once again, on the outside looking in. He returned to America. No job, no money, no future. He was 31 years old, and his life was in ruins. Here's what you need to understand about second chances. They rarely come easy, and they never come clean. In September 1942, Boyington did something desperate. He went back to the Marine Corps, the same organization he dequit a year earlier, and begged for another shot. By every measure, they should have laughed him out of the room. He was older than most pilots. He had resigned his commission. He had a drinking problem. He was, by all accounts, unreliable. But the Marines were bleeding pilots in the Pacific. The war wasn't going well. They needed experienced combat veterans, and Boyington, for all his flaws, had 6 confirmed kills against Japanese aircraft. They needed warm bodies in cockpits more than they needed perfect officers. So they took him back, but they didn't trust him, not really. For the next year, Boyington bounced around desk jobs and training assignments. He watched younger pilot skids really get promoted past him. He watched them ship out to the Pacific while he stayed behind. He was too old, too problematic, too risky. The Marine brass figured they'd use his combat experience to train others and keep him far away from actual fighting, but Boyington wasn't built for desks. He lobbied, argued, and fought for a combat assignment. He pulled every string he could reach. And finally, in August 1943, he got his chance. But not the way he expected. The Marine Corps had a problem. They had replacement pilots, guys who'd finished training but hadn't been assigned to squadrons. These weren't the cream of the crop. These were the leftovers, the misfits, the troublemakers nobody else wanted. They needed someone to lead them. Someone expendable. They gave them to Boyington. He was told to form Marine Fighter Squadron 214 VMF-214 and get these rejects combat ready in a matter of weeks. It was supposed to be a throwaway assignment. A way to keep Boyington busy while putting the replacement pilots somewhere they couldn't cause too much trouble, but Boyington saw something different. He looked at these pilots, guys who'd been overlooked, underestimated, written off, and he saw himself. These were his kind of people. He gathered them together on their first day and gave them a choice. They could play it safe, follow all the rules, and probably get themselves killed doing things by the book. Or they could trust him, a washed-up drunk with a chip on his shoulder, and fight like they had nothing to lose, because they didn't. They became VMF-214, but everyone else started calling them something different, the Black Sheep. And Boyington, he was older than almost all of them, ancient by fighter pilot standards. So they called him Pappy. The legend was about to begin. September 16, 1943. Munda Airfield, Solomon Islands. The Black Sheep flew their first combat mission. And within minutes, everyone realized something extraordinary was happening. Boyington didn't fly like other squadron commanders. He didn't play it safe or hang back directing traffic. He dove into enemy formations headfirst, hunting Japanese planes with the kind of reckless aggression that either made you an ace or got you killed, usually both. But here's what made him different. He could teach it. He understood aerial combat at an instinctive level that most pilots took years to develop. He taught his Black Sheep to hunt in pairs, to trust their wingmen absolutely, to be aggressive but smart. He taught them that rules were guidelines and that sometimes you survived by doing the exact opposite of what the manual said. Most importantly, he taught them to believe in themselves. Within their first month, VMF-214 became the most feared squadron in the South Pacific. They shot down enemy planes at a rate that seemed impossible. Boyington himself was scoring kills almost daily. The Japanese put a price on his head. Other Marine squadrons, the ones filled with proper officers and respectable pilots, watched in disbelief as this collection of misfits dominated the skies. But it wasn't just their combat record, it was how they did it. The Black Sheep ignored regulations constantly. They drank when they weren't supposed to. They gambled, they pulled pranks on superior officers. Boyington once threatened to punch an admiral who tried to ground him for violating orders. They were undisciplined, chaotic, and absolutely unstoppable in the air. And here's the thing about success, it makes people forgive an awful lot. By November 1943, Boyington had 22 confirmed kills. He was closing in on the Marine Corps' record of 26, held by Joe Foss. The newspapers back home were eating it up. Papy Boyington became a household name. The hard-drinking rebel leading a squadron of misfits to glory, it was perfect propaganda. But Boyington was exhausted. He'd been flying multiple missions every day for months. The stress, the combat, the pressure, it was wearing him down. His hands shook when he wasn't flying. The drinking, which he'd managed to control during combat operations, was creeping back in during downtime. His commanders told him to take a break. They wanted to send him home for a publicity tour, let him rest, cash in on his celebrity. He refused. He was for kills away from tying the record. He wasn't going home until he got it. On December 17, 1943, he flew his last mission. The morning of December 17th started like any other. Boyington and the Black Sheep took off from their base at Bougainville, heading for Rabaul, the most heavily defended Japanese base in the South Pacific. Intelligence suggested there might be enemy fighters in the area. Intelligence was correct. Within minutes of arriving over Rabaul, the Black Sheep ran into a formation of Japanese Zeros, not 5 or 10, roughly 70. The fight that followed was chaos. Boyington dove into the enemy formation, his wingmen desperately trying to keep up. In the swirling dogfight that followed, Boyington shot down his 25th confirmed kill, one more, and he tied the record. Minutes later, he spotted another Zero. He closed in, fired, and watched it spiral into the ocean. 26, he'd done it. He tied Joe Foss's record, and then everything went wrong. Japanese fighters swarmed him from every direction. His plane took hits, then more hits. His wingman was forced to break away. Boyington was alone, surrounded by enemy aircraft, his plane coming apart around him. He radioed one last message. "Engines cut. I'm going in." The Black Sheep watched helplessly as Pappy's Corsair plunged toward the ocean and disappeared beneath the waves. There was no parachute, no signal, no survival raft spotted. Gregory Papy Boyington was gone. Back home, the news hit like a bomb. Papy Boyington, the hero, the ace, the rebel everyone had fallen in love with, was missing in action, presumed dead. The newspapers ran front-page stories. His mother received telegrams. The nation mourned. But here's where the story gets strange. There were rumors, whispers among intelligence circles. Some pilots reported seeing a parachute before Boyington's plane hit the water. The Japanese weren't saying anything, but that wasn't unusual. The possibility lingered. Maybe, somehow, he'd survived. Months passed, then a year, then another. The Marine Corps eventually declared him dead. They awarded him the Medal of Honor posthumously for his final mission and his extraordinary combat record. The Black Sheep Squadron was disbanded, the war moved on. And everyone assumed that was the end of Papy Boyington's story. They were wrong. August 29, 1945, just weeks after Japan's surrender, a group of skeletal American POWs emerged from a prison camp near Tokyo. One of them was Gregory Boyington. He was alive, barely, but alive. Here's what had happened. When his plane went down, Boyington had managed to bail out. He was injured but conscious when he hit the water. A Japanese submarine picked him up within minutes. They'd been watching the entire dogfight. For the next 20 months, Boyington was a prisoner of war. He was interrogated, beaten, and shuttled between multiple prison camps. The Japanese knew exactly who they had: the famous American ace, the man with the 26 kills, the leader of the Black Sheep. They used him for propaganda, starved him, and ensured he survived just barely enough to be useful. Boyington endured it all: the torture, the starvation, the psychological warfare. He never broke. Even when his captors told him the war was lost for America, that his squadron had been wiped out, that no one was looking for him anymore, he never gave them what they wanted. And when American forces finally liberated his camp in August 1945, Gregory Boyington walked out on his own defeat. He weighed 90 pounds, but he was alive. You'd think that's where the happy ending kicks in. The hero returns home, gets his medal, fades into a comfortable retirement. But Boyington's story was never going to end that way. He came home to a hero's welcome. President Truman personally awarded him the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. The Marine Corps promoted him to colonel. There were parades, interviews, book deals. America loved Papy Boyington. But Pappy couldn't shake the war. The drinking came back worse than before. The nightmares, the memories of combat and captivity. What we'd now call PTSD consumed him. His marriages, all 4 of them, ended in divorce. His finances collapsed again. He bounced from job to job, never quite able to settle into civilian life. In 1958, he wrote his memoir, Black Sheep, which became a bestseller. In the 1970s, it was adapted into a TV series that made him famous all over again. But by then, Boyington was a shadow of his former self. The alcohol had taken its toll, his health was failing. He died on January 11, 1988, at the age of 75 from lung cancer. The Marine Corps buried him with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. So, what do we make of Gregory Pappy Boyington? He was a complicated man. Brilliant and self-destructive, brave and reckless. A natural leader who couldn't manage his own life. He broke rules constantly but became one of the most effective combat pilots in American history. He was court-martialed for debt and awarded the Medal of Honor. He was everything you weren't supposed to be and everything America needed during its darkest hour. 26 confirmed victories to tour of duty. 2 years as a POW. The Medal of Honor. The Navy Cross, the leader of the most legendary squadron in Marine Corps history. But here's what makes his story matter beyond the statistics. Boyington proved that heroes don't have to be perfect. They don't have to follow all the rules or fit the mold or come from the right background. Sometimes the best leaders are the broken ones, the ones who failed and clawed their way back. The ones who see potential in other people's rejects because they know what it's like to be one. The Black Sheep weren't supposed to be special. They were leftovers, throwaway pilots nobody else wanted. But Boyington saw something in them, the same thing he saw in himself. The refusal to quit, the determination to prove everyone wrong. The understanding that sometimes being an outsider is exactly what makes you dangerous. That's his real legacy. Not just the 26 kills or the Medal of Honor, but the proof that redemption is possible. That second chances can become legendary. That the guy everyone's written off might just save the day. There's a statue of Boyington now at the University of Washington where his story began. He stands there in his flight suit, looking up at the sky, forever young. The inscription reads simply, Gregory Pappy Boyington, United States Marine Corps, Congressional Medal of Honor. But if you ask the surviving members of the Black Sheep Squadron what they remember most, they don't talk about the medals or the victories. They talk about the man who believed in them when no one else did. The old drunk who taught them how to fly and fight and survive. They talk about Pappy. And 80 years later, his legend still soars.